Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Hark Singh. Let me tell you a little bit about what I've been doing and who I am, and then I'm going to take you through a macro view as to what's happening in the industry. I think it's a very exciting time. It's a pretty pivotal moment, and there's a big wave coming, if you haven't felt it already. And so I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be very exciting. So my name is Hark Singh. I'm CTO of Infra Partners, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Infra Partners later in the presentation. My background is I was at BlackRock prior to this, where I headed up the innovation office. I was also COO there of technology, data and AI teams, cyber, and enterprise services. I also advised their infrastructure funds, so the BlackRock Infrastructure Fund, and also their sustainability funds, which is the decarbonisation partners. And done a lot in the data center space over the last 20 years. So Thomson Reuters and BT, both in the energy space and the data center space as well. So I like to start with a macro view, and I think this view from Dr. Max Rosa from Oxford University is the most macro view I've found. And I think what this shows and outlines is the pace of change. Human history is defined by waves of change, and they're only going to be accelerating. And so I know some of you at the back can't see this graphic, but I would highly advise you to download the slides and have a look at it. But what you'll realize as you look through this, millions of years ago, there were tools that were created, but as you look through the dates, through the first industrial revolution, the second, the third, and to where we are today, the rate of change is accelerating. And if you look at this here, these circles are actually, each circle is 200,000 years. Then each one of these lines here is 1,000 years. And then that, where most of the innovations has happened over the last 200 years. So if you look across the whole of human history, there's some big changes that are going to take place, and I think the future is very exciting. I actually had an image generator from AI actually take a picture, or create a picture of the 4 industrial revolutions. And so this is that picture. So this took place over the last 200 years. And my view is that over the next 30 years, there's going to be more change than there has been over the last 250 years. And so we live in very exponential times, very exciting times. But I want you to look at this picture and imagine if you were living in this era here, imagine that taking place over 30 years. And so what that means is there's a lot of value that's going to be generated. And this industry is going to underpin this growth, is going to underpin this change. And it's a big challenge, and we'll go into some of the numbers and the underlying infrastructure that is going to be needed to deliver this, but it's a big challenge to us as an industry to deliver this and to enable it across the world. And so there's a couple of metrics out here from different management consultants, but I think the consensus is that this is a $1 trillion opportunity. And I know the next panel is going to talk about this a little bit as well. But whoever you believe, whether it's McKinsey at 4.4 trillion, whether it's PwC at 15, whether it's Goldman Sachs at 7, there is consensus that's going to change the world. And so we need to be ready as an industry to be able to support this and to embrace it. But it's a very exciting and pivotal moment in human history. So AI is going to change every industry. And I put the industries up here. I've put some of the use cases that have already been sort of making a difference in some of these industries, but I think we're only scratching the surface. And so as whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, whether it's transportation, everything is fundamentally going to change with AI. And so organizations as they exist today are going to have to be reimagined using AI tools. I like the way it was Mustafa Suleyman who created DeepMind that said, the modern AI Turing test is going to be to a ChatGPT or to a model where you're going to say, hey, make me $1 million on Amazon if I invest $100,000. And literally the AI would go away and build everything. It'll do the research into which products are hot. It'll actually create the website for you. It will set the price. And literally we'll do the sales. We'll set up the back end around drop shipping. We'll essentially automate all of that. And so the way you think about how businesses are run today, tomorrow they're going to fundamentally change. And so I think it's an exciting time. It's a time of great change. There's going to be huge displacement. But I think it's a very exciting time for our industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the underlying infrastructure that supports a lot of this AI. And maybe you've seen this chart before, but what this chart shows essentially is the different large language models that have been created. Those that are in blue here are the ones that have been publicly released, and the ones here in amber are the ones that are projected to be released in the future. But what you'll see is this chart is exponential. It goes from hundreds of millions of parameters to billions to trillions to tens of trillions. And so we're already at ChatGPT at about 1 trillion parameters for a model. And so this is going up 10x every generation. And we're talking about gigawatts of power. You know, the metric used to be megawatts. Now we're in single-digit gigawatts. And as you look even further out to things like ChatGPT-7, which is something that Sam Altman talks about if you hear some of his presentations, you're going to be talking about tens of gigawatts of power for infrastructure. And so we're going to a scale that we've never seen before in this industry. And so it's going to be a time where we have to change what we do. The existing way of doing things won't work. Although every generation here is a 10x increase, there's going to be other optimizations as well. So there's going to be optimization of the architecture, high bandwidth memory, and other parts of the stack. You know, what we've found is although there's a 10x increase in every generation of compute requirements, that equates to about a 2x increase in power. And so there is other optimizations, but 2x is still pretty significant when you're talking about gigawatts of power. And so, you know, there has to be optimization across the whole stack, but there's going to be significant growth. And what that means is there's opportunity across the whole of the supply chain on how we build infrastructure, on how we power this new set of infrastructure that's going to change every single industry. That's $1 trillion opportunity. And the value is there. And so it's going to be our collective challenge to solve this for the industry, to make sure we don't hold the world back and we're actually seen as an enabler to be able to enable this. But if you look across the whole supply chain, whether it's the vendors with the long lead items, whether it's how we deliver data centers, whether it's energy production, whether it's chips, you know, we're going to have to make sure we're not the bottleneck to enable this. Countries will see this as an opportunity to be a differentiator. So what you'll see is, right now you'll see there are very large hyperscalers building out, you know, very large models, training models. In the future, there's going to be inference, which is going to be closer to the user. And then there'll also be sovereign models, which each country will set up themselves for their own national security. So you may have already started to see countries coming out and actually deploying their own AI for their own security. And so the world is going to change a little bit. But again, there's a huge opportunity across the whole supply chain to do things differently. I borrowed this slide from Meta, so all credit goes to Meta for this slide. But I thought it was a really good way of showing, what they're showing here is the workload for the different AI models they have. And whether it's compute intensive, memory intensive, network latency sensitive, and what you'll find is for the 5 different workloads on AI, there is nothing that's uniform, right? So whether it's large language model training, whether it's inference for large language models in terms of infill or decode, whether it's rank and recommendation, which is what they use on their feeds, nothing is uniform. So, you know, we are very early in this AI race. You know, if you watch soccer, football, I should say, you know, we're sort of 2 minutes into the game. And we don't know where this is all going to go, but there has to be also some changes and evolution on the application side, where there's some harmonization of requirements. But just so you know, when you talk about AI, you're talking about here 5 different types of workloads being managed in a data center. And so this will evolve, but it's something to keep an eye on, and that will change what you put in the data center. And so, you know, we're solving something that needs to be flexible right now. On the environmental side, you know, I've put some data and stats on the slide here, but I think that the truth is we don't fully know what this AI wave is going to mean in terms of how much we're going to deploy. We can see single-digit gigawatts. We can see a path to double-digit gigawatts of deployments. And the truth is that this power isn't available. There isn't gigawatts of power just sitting on the grid waiting to be used for data centers. And so, the IEA, the International Energy Association, released a report this year called Electricity 2024. But essentially, the trends are they're going up to the right. And whichever market you look at, whether it's the US, the EU, Ireland, if you saw NVIDIA's numbers yesterday, they're selling more chips than the market had forecasted. So the wave is coming. But all that means is, and if you look at the trajectory here on the best case scenarios and the high case scenario, is we need a lot more power and data center capacity and mechanical electrical plant and land to be able to deliver what the world will need and what will be a differentiator for folks. And so we have a challenge ourselves to solve this, and I think we need to think differently than we have in the past to be able to solve it. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the problems and challenges we're seeing across the way we do things today. The current model won't scale. We've seen that it's not working very well as it exists today. And so we're going to have to think about this differently because traditional construction has taken too long. So first thing is labor shortages. We're seeing labor shortages in key markets around the world. And so, whether that's, GCs, whether it's construction skills, electricians, there's a huge shortage that's taking place. And this is before the AI wave has actually hit. And so we know the problem is only going to get worse from a labor perspective, especially in developed markets. From a delivery perspective, many of the projects that we've seen are not running to schedule for whatever reason, but they're not running to schedule. So there's a huge, backlog of projects that are delivering late. And then, as I mentioned, there's an exponential growth that's coming. We need to be able to, multiple X, not 5% more, not 10% more, not 20% more, multiple X deployment, speed, and size. And so the only way we can get there is really around standardizing and scale. And we're not the first industry that's standardized to be able to scale quicker. And so we're talking about doing something that other industries have done before as well. So it literally it's the maturity of the industry to be able to deliver the kind of scale of infrastructure we need in the future to support the AI growth and to support essentially fundamentally changing the way we all live and the way, the constraints that we live our lives around. We're going to have to change the way we do things. And that's where Infra Partners has come in and is starting to look at really, how can things be done differently? And so the idea here was around ODM, lowering TCO, getting quicker to market, delivering a standardized design, a standard product, QCing, building offsite, and delivering anywhere to the world. And that's anywhere to the world is important. There's 35% of the world is not connected to the right type of internet, the high-speed internet that you need to. And that's a key enabler to doing any of this stuff. You can't do AI unless you have basic internet access. And so, this is about being able to solve, being able to enable that digital revolution and enable the AI revolution. That's what the Infra Partners mission is, and that's why I joined the firm myself. And so essentially we're talking about standard building blocks, full offsite manufacturing, 8 megawatts to 200 megawatts. You can do liquid cooling for the NVIDIA racks that are coming, the high density up to 100 kilowatts. 100 kilowatts, I've been in this industry 20 years. Who imagined 100 kilowatts? And you say 100, that 100 is what people are talking about now, but in the labs you're talking 200, 300. I've had up to 600 kilowatt cap. Like half a megawatt in a cabinet. We could never have imagined that. Liquid cooling, I put liquid cooling into Thomson Reuters labs 10 years ago to test it. We've been talking about liquid cooling is coming, it's a few years away, and now it's like we need it now. And so, this will change, AI will change what we do and how we build. And so, the constraints upon which we lived in the past are going to change, essentially. So this is the schematic design we have around an AI modular solution. It's a 2 megawatt block that can be dropped in into whatever configuration you want, with a cooling design that includes liquid cooling, CDUs, on-chip, and also supplemental cooling. modularized power modules and generators. And, I think when you think about modular, it's not about building a module and sticking it in a field. Everything should be built in a modular way, even if it's a brick building. Why? Because it creates standardization, flexibility, upgradability. How many of you built data centers in the last 10, 15 years thinking you're going to put liquid in them? Oh, one. Okay, well done. And so there's not many. That's my point, right? And these data centers are going to have at least 3 to 4 generations of equipment going through them. Now, who wants to predict what the next, density of the next rack's going to be, or what technology it's going to be? I mean, even Sam Altman doesn't want to predict. When they say what's going to happen in the AI space, this is the person who's leading this thing globally. And he's like, it's a fool's errand to predict what's going to happen, right? So we can't either. So what do we need? We need flexibility. We need to build for flexibility. And so that's what this allows you to do. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I think we have some time for questions. So happy to take some questions from the audience. I don't think there is a mic, so please project. Have we got any questions? Are you all convinced? This presentation was about 60% generated by AI, just so you know. Okay. Oh, there's one there. Is there a mic?
Is there a mic or just speak? No, there is a mic.
Is it? If you just don't mind saying your name and who you're from, and then the question.
My name is Mike.
Mike? Let's get Mike a mic. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I'm with Columbia Capital. You mentioned about this increased power density in racks, and what you're hearing about what you're hearing from labs increasing further than what we're seeing in the market today. Are you seeing anything on the horizon about the chips perhaps becoming more productive and sort of working the other way in terms of power efficiency, being able to do more for less power? Is anything dramatic happening on the horizon?
Yeah, there is a lot of work going on in that space. I mean, that's why I mentioned every model generation is a 10x increase. But only, if you took all the other optimizations in place, only 2x is power, right? And so there is, look, I mean, we are new to this whole AI game as an industry on the chip side, on every side. So we do expect there's going to be optimization at every layer of the stack. So absolutely, there has to be. We can't have every generation having 10x more power. It just won't work. And so there'll be innovation at every layer of the stack. But even after those innovations, 2x is the metric that we're aligning around in terms of what it means for power. And so absolutely. That's why I say there is opportunity across the whole supply chain here. We are building, infrastructure that's mostly net new. Because the first question I asked was, okay, so what's going to be displaced? So what in the CPU world, CPU-based infrastructure, what are we not going to have to do anymore? Is all that going to disappear? And the most common response I get is, apart from search, which obviously is what large language models are very good at, everything else everyone's saying is going to be the same. So a lot of this is net new, right? It's a new world, it's a new paradigm shift, and I think we need to look at it from scratch, because we can't use legacy ways to solve this 10x problem. And so 100%, there's going to be optimization across the whole stack, and there's going to be opportunity. There's obviously a lot of funds here, from a digital infrastructure perspective, from an energy perspective. There's a lot of opportunities across the whole stack here in terms of value creation. If there's trillions of dollars worth of opportunity here for the world, there's a big opportunity for returns. Okay, cool.
Martin Edge from Infrastructure. I just wondered, there's always been a trade-off with DCs between being located in a physical location which creates efficiencies around the DC's function, for example in cold places, versus proximity to where the data is generated and will ultimately be used. Do you see any trends occurring in that relationship between physical location and where the source of data lies?
Yeah, I do, and I think here's where you need to split training and inference. So training itself, training foundational models is going to be gigawatts of power. That will be located where the power is. Probably close to power stations, and also where cost of power is very low. So that's where the actual training itself will be located. In terms of inference, which is when you prompt the model and get a response, is going to be close to users. Just because it's latency sensitive. You know, if you put a prompt in, you don't have to wait 10 minutes for a response, or you don't want it to generate one word and then take 6 seconds to generate the next word. The actual interaction is very important. And so training next to where there's power availability and low cost of power, and inference essentially close to users. And so that's how it's going to play out. And that's, like I said, net new on top of everything else we've built in the CPU base. I mean, if you look at some of the numbers, that is mind-boggling. You know, and I'm sure you'll see some research over yesterday and today. You know, we're talking about building, you know, everything we've built in history, we're talking about building that again in 2 years. Everything we've built in the data center industry and in the whole of history, we're talking about building again in 2 years' time. But the numbers are mind-boggling. And so it's a big challenge we all need to step up to. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I had a similar question. I'm David from HPC Data. We built this AI infrastructure in Latin America, purpose-built for AI. And my question is there demand for that, even geographically, bringing the computing power, like you said, training down to Latin America? Because there is a lot of power energy, low cost.
If you've got power and it's renewable and sustainable, because that's one of the things we didn't speak a lot about, is we need to build this thing sustainably. You know, I think that'll be very attractive. You know, but again, you need to work out, is it training or inference? It depends where you are, right? Peter?
Yeah, Peter Hamilton, Portman Partners. All the discussions so far have been around the supply side. All our concerns are about the supply side. No one seems to be looking at demand. Shouldn't we start to be thinking about controlling the demand and maybe start charging for using the internet?
It's a great question. You know, how do you incentivize the right behavior on the demand side? This is essentially what you're saying. I mean, I'm a big fan of equitable access, right? I think it doesn't matter what background, which country you're from, low income, high income, everybody should have access to that platform that could essentially differentiate you. You know, I remember, you know, when we were talking about the first time when internet came out and the bandwidth numbers went up, you know, a kid in India with an internet connection can walk through the Met Museum and look at art at gigapixel level and actually zoom into brush strokes on art. You know, and so I think that's, you know, I think there was a view that the internet became a great equalizer. And for me, I would never want to say that away. Because then what it means is it's your ambition that defines how far you go. And I think the same thing with AI. Like, I wouldn't want to constrain it based on money. But I think you make a good point, though, on how do we make sure it's not all about building more and more and more and more, the insatiable appetite, and not having any kind of management on the demand side. And the analogy I use is, if I look at I was changing phones the other day, and I looked at the number of photos I had 4,000 photos in the last year. And then I looked at my wife, she had 15,000, right? So I'm like, did we used to collect 20,000 photos a year? No. You know, I then question, is anybody going to look at these? Apart from AI, I think AI will look at them, but I don't think anybody else is going to flick through them. So I think there is a point around, I wouldn't want to take away the equitable part and the opportunity part of these services, but I think there is something to be said around, you know, how do you optimize? And I actually think an AI will do it for us. Like, I don't think it's a human problem. I think we should, Peter, challenge the AI to optimize the demand side for us.
My name is Anita from the University of Illinois. My question is around, you talked about the labor shortage being one of the problems. And when I hear labor, I hear people.
Yep.
And so what is the strategies with trying to get the workforce that's going to be needed in order to make all of this happen? And before we jump into, we're going to dump a bunch of money into kids and things of that nature, are there thoughts about how do we upskill the workforce that's out there now, reskilling individuals in order to be able to take on these jobs and be able to make this happen?
That's a great question. I think, labor is people, but it's also a very local issue. It's hard to attract people to, some of the most remote parts of the US, as an example, right? Most people want to go to the big cities and they want to live the American dream. And so it's very similar here. So I think it's a very local issue, but we know just based on projects that are happening now that we're struggling. And we know there's a wave coming, like a big wave coming. You can see the numbers from NVIDIA about how many GPUs have been sold. How many of them actually have been housed properly in a data center yet, is the question. And I would argue there's a lot that's coming that hasn't got a home yet, right? In terms of how do we solve this issue, this is why we went the modular way and sort of prefabricators to do it centrally, dispatch it anywhere. That's really the model. In the future, I think humanoids, I think we'll be there. I think you make a really good point, though, and we know humanoids are not there yet because they can't. There's a bunch of basic stuff that humans can do that they can't do yet, but I think that's one of the big use cases of AI. You've probably seen what Tesla's doing in this space and a few others. But I think you make a good point about displacement of skills. But we had Jensen come talk to us from NVIDIA, and he mentioned, there is going to be a displacement of skills, absolutely. But he mentioned something which I thought was really interesting, which was, AI has obviously been great for their business. The profitability has grown obviously a lot. But what are they doing? They're actually, he's focused on the next set of problems now. And what does the next set of problems mean? He needs to recruit people. So he's recruiting, right? And I think you'll find the same with every other industry, is once AI is deployed into a lot of business functions, what will happen is margins will go up. And what will happen when margins go up? You'll be like, let's go after the next opportunity. And what does that mean? It means investment. Solving a problem means you need people, right? And so I think the type of skills needed are going to change. And I think that's what's up to sort of, governments around the world, is how do you get people on that pathway to get into a future where their skills are more relevant? But that's no different than human history. We'll look back at a time and we'll say, did humans really reset passwords? Did humans really drive cars? Did we really have checkout assistants at supermarkets? Like, was that really a good use of human time? In the past, humans used to cut grass by hand. Nobody would say and go, look, hey, we should go back to a time, get rid of all the electric mowers and the engines, and let's cut grass by hand, because it's not a useful purpose for human time. So again, in the future, this will be displaced, but it's all about how do you keep relevant to the time? And so I think that's a challenge every individual faces. They need to stay relevant to the time. When we talk about, when America was great or when Britain was great, everybody has a different time in mind, but normally it was when they were most relevant or when they had a lot of options. What happened? The world moved on. They didn't. And so as individuals, everybody needs to take personal responsibility to stay as relevant as they can in the time. A wave's coming. I've just presented that a new wave's coming. So, you can learn the next set of skills around prompt engineering. And no company can ask you, I want a prompt engineer with 4 years of experience. Well, it wasn't here 4 years ago, right? And so the point is people need to change with the times. They need to take personal responsibility. And all these institutes need to support them, whether it's governments or parents or whoever need to support people through change. And so I think, hopefully that first slide I showed you is the pace of change is increasing. So if anything, what you want is you want people that are resilient, that are able to adapt. I think adaptability is going to be most important. Does that answer those questions? Okay, good.
So, on the end of your slide, you talked about the explosion of demand side, a huge number of photos, bundle of data that's not needed, that sort of stuff. We obviously have a lot of regulation on the supply side, so there's room for different EU regulations, carbon emissions, that sort of stuff. How far away do you think we are from seeing some sort of regulation or constraint on the demand side, as in regulation on efficiency of storage or volume of storage that companies have?
So do you mean regulation on companies as opposed to individuals and individual behavior?
Well, I mean, look at energy now, well, it gets pushed to individuals by companies, but the starting point would be trying to regulate, say, Meta or not really frankly we saying this, but is that to regulate Meta or Amazon the amount of data they could store, that would constrain the volume of demand on the supply side?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm a big fan of it. I think a lot of this has unintended consequences. Why has Gen AI and large language models come about? There's a few things that happened. Firstly, the cost of GPUs came down. Secondly, the amount of data to train on was there to be able to build them. Now, if you had constrained through regulation the amount of data somebody could have, or the web could have, then you wouldn't have been able to create large language models, or the accuracy wouldn't be as good because you wouldn't have as much data to train them on. So I think we need to be really mindful of, although we think we're doing the right thing, we could be constraining the next $1 trillion opportunity. And so I think there definitely needs to be conversation between the different various actors, including government. But I think we need to be really mindful of, the unintended consequences. This is a good thing. The way the world is going to change is a good thing. I know obviously there is the other side where people are really worried about it, and the ethics side, and I think that needs to be worked through, and there needs to be some controls on some of that. And there is, if you look at the nuclear industry, there's controls on nuclear. There's a time when humans, if they carried on with the development of nuclear, could have extinguished everybody in the world. But, common sense prevailed, mostly, and, there's treaties in place where they sort of talk to one another, and so I think some of the other impacts we need to manage and have controls against. But I think the regulation needs to, make sure it drives the right behavior, and doesn't have unintended consequences. Do I think it's close? I don't think it's close. I think people will try, and there'll be crude ways to do it, and we've seen some of that in our industry. But I think that just means we need to keep working with, the right governments and folks to make sure that it's not something that's going to, have an adverse impact, essentially. Okay, I think that's my cue to close out. If there's any other questions, my email was on the second slide. It's just h@infrapartners.llc. And so, reach out. But thank you.